It is 6:31 and we are ready to open the meeting. We'll start with a roll call. Mike Ahern, Chair. Rhonda Bishop, Vice Chair. Pat Roach, Member. John Winlett, John Kelly, Ray Gosney, Selectmen's Representative, and Paul Wilson. This brings us to item number 3, general public comments. And this is a time where a citizen can bring up an item that is not already on the agenda if they would wish to speak. Seeing none, that will bring us to administrative matters, item number 4. And before we start, I would like to mention this is a continuation of an item that was on the agenda last week. Again, let me stress that there will be no public hearing tonight. It will just be the board discussing the item. And it is our job to do it right. And the planning board takes this job very seriously. And we want to make sure that we don't make mistakes that would cost the citizens and their taxes a lot of money. And there has been an issue in the past where it costs between $60,000 and $100,000 for the town attorney to litigate an issue that was that required the town attorney to help the planning board out and go to court many times. So we want to make sure that if there's a way to prevent that, that we do the best job we can, explain everything that we're doing, and so I'm going to turn things over to Sharon.
Along that vein, I just wanted to state for the record and for everyone's general information that neither this board nor the planner nor the zoning officer, first of all, work in collusion with applicants. We go out of our way, particularly Brian and I know this board does also, to make sure that everyone gets the help they need to interpret the planning and zoning regulations as written and the zoning ordinance. There's been some feedback to that effect. We won't even talk about the offense that's taken at that. We will just say that regardless of who you are and why you come through those doors, we're here to help you to the best of our ability. So I just want to get that straight on the record.
So, Mr. Wilson.
I just have a question where you announced that there would be no public hearing.
In relation to the subdivision.
In relation to subdivision. But there may well be a public hearing on the remainder of the meeting following that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson, for pointing that out. So where we left off last meeting, where we continued to tonight, there was some discussion about what premises meant. We did get the feedback that we needed, or a recommendation. We did get counsel on that from town attorney. That brings us back to discussion about how we would, whether there would be a motion and then possibly a vote. So we're back to where we were last week. Everybody's had a chance to read the information. So, Mr. Wilson.
Well, I'll preface my remarks by saying that I'm not a lawyer, but as I read the letter and from our town attorney, where he defined the many different ways in which premises can be defined, nowhere in there did he say that the premises had to be contiguous. So it would seem to me, sharing a common boundary, so it would seem to me that if an applicant, if we accepted that definition of this definition of premises, and if an applicant came to us and said they want to excavate in the ESZ and transport the material to a different site down the road, if it was part of the same subdivision or part of the same site plan, then that would be considered part of the same premises. And it just struck me as overly broad. That would really seem to defeat the entire notion of the environmentally sensitive zone. So I just make that comment. I don't know if anybody else on the board feels that way.
I think if there's any other discussion about the letter, I think we're... Mr. Kelly.
I read this over a couple of times, and I agree with Paul, and it's too general, and there's too many instances that they try to explain what a premise is. You know, first they're saying it could be with a mall-like, and then they explain it could be something else. It doesn't give a clear definition of what premise is, and maybe they never could, because maybe premise is elusive as far as the definition is concerned. I really honestly believe, maybe not in this case, but I think that we should somewhere along the way come up with a different word than premise, whether it's you know, site or lot or something like that, that defines what you're supposed to say, and so that the ordinary public can understand it. I'm sure if you read this to the ordinary public, they would have absolutely no idea of what you were talking about. It's a very good explanation for a legal explanation, but it really isn't a defined word.
Sure.
Could I ask Mr. Kelly a question? So, John, are you saying what you would like to see, this is what I'm hearing, that you would like to see changes to the zoning definition and any correlative subdivision or site plan regulations regarding that word premise? Is that what you're saying? Because we have to work with what we've got here in front of us.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm just saying, there should be, I can't understand what this is. I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I've read enough internal revenue codes, and they're fairly undefinable. And this is exactly what is like that is. So they don't come up with any defined, explanation as far as what this word is. And if they said site or lot or location or something that you could hang your thoughts on, then I think it would be a lot better. I understand right now that there's not too much you can do about it, but I think it's a very poor word to be involved in subdivisions and so forth.
Mr. Gosman.
I do find the clarity that is contained in this letter that John alludes to that he does not find. It is contained in the very last sentence of the communications. To me, it provides the specifics that address this application, which, as Sharon has already pointed out, is the matter that is in front of us. I greatly appreciated the other context that the attorney lent to it. So he essentially provided background information that leads to that sentence. And that sentence says that the premise in this application would be that the lot submitted to the board's jurisdiction has the proposed development plan. So to me, it provides very specific clarification that with that information that we have in front of us, and this goes to part of Mr. Wilson's request, it's in front of us. It's not a hypothetical of whether it's down the road another half a mile or whatever. It's in front of us now. So in my mind, that last sentence provides all the clarity that I personally need to answer what does premise mean in this particular application.
Mr. Roach.
I agree with Mr. Gosney. I think it's very clear what premise means as far as it pertains to this application. I think for an ordinary public, and I can understand what it means.
And if there's no other comments from the board, I also was not picking a side, but I was very happy to see that it was as clear as it was on this page. It couldn't have been any more clearer, I don't believe, to me, which makes it a lot easier for the town. And I think we're, at this point, ready for a motion.
Oh, I have, I'm sorry, I don't want to be out of order here. Not a motion to
motion
approve,
on-
or no motion to approve or disapprove, just to deal with this particular aspect of it.
I'm not sure whether we need a vote on whether,
No.
I'm thinking a motion that we're ready to approve the subdivision.
I have additional information for you, which one is just incidental. It's just pro forma from Plymouth Village Water and Sewer, and it essentially says, and Jeff, I'll have a copy for you, that you folks need to be in touch with them and speak to connections and everything out there if the application is approved. So this is just kind of not fluff, but it's not critical. However, one of the issues that was brought up last week was about the aspect of a specific historic site on these two lots in terms of the Abenaki Massacre, the Abenaki Village, the Abenaki Massacre, and Lieutenant Baker. I did get in touch with the Department of Historic Resources, SHPO, in Concord, and you probably just want to look. It's a very quick read. It refers to the fact that a thorough archaeological analysis was done prior to when the Lowe's application was in place, and it shows their findings. Dear Ms. Penny, blah, blah, blah. We do have a project file for 2005. If this project is indeed the same location, which it is, exactly two same parcels, then an archaeological survey was completed. The testing was thorough, and no further work was recommended following the Phase 2 archaeological testing. Native American materials were recovered, however, the area exhibited varying degrees of disturbances meaning archaeological remnants. As far as the massacre site location, as with many sites of historic importance, the historic account might suggest that this event may have happened in this general vicinity located along the Baker River in Plymouth, et cetera, et cetera. It just infers that historic record, unfortunately, is not 100% pinpoint accurate because it's usually oral tradition and some of the records have been lost. But I thought it was important for you folks to know that that was checked on. And it's a lovely site. It is historic, but there's no de facto actual, only there historic inference. That's all I have.
What is the pleasure of the board at this point, then?
Make a motion that we approve the two-lot commercial subdivision on Tenny Mountain Highway.
Second.
Would you be willing to, we needed conditions?
You can do it two ways. You can make the motion with conditions initially if they're overt and obvious, or you can make the motion with the understanding that after the motion goes through that you will apply conditions to it, and that's going to require some discussion.
Well, I think, again, when I make that motion to approve it, you know, pending all permits and approvals by, you know, DOT, DES, and other.
There were some items in discussion last week. I remember 1 through 5 and 1 through 7.
I've got some here.
From the town engineer? Do we want
Yes.
10 items?
Where's that?
Well, if somebody wants to amend it, they can.
Yeah.
We'll get a motion in second, and then discussion.
All right, so we have a motion, it's been seconded, we can discuss that at this point and talk about what conditions we would like to add to that.
I can give the board what I have written down that I recall, and then,
I remember one thing, we talked about that the subdivision would not be recorded until both lots are made to be buildable. That was one of the big conditions, or no?
well, that's,
Or would not be sold?
oh, it cannot be sold. Another point of clarification is a de facto subdivision, and this is from the attorney, town's attorney, is not legal and binding until it is recorded at the Registry of Deeds and all conditions satisfied if it's a conditional approval. In this particular case, Jeff Lewis, the applicant's engineer, spoke last time about the idiosyncrasies of these two parcels because they were under different liens, I believe, that it was actually going to come under what is called a lot consolidation and re-subdivision. So it's something that happens all at once. There will not be a lot line merger application brought before this board because they can't do it because there's essentially two different ownership banks, if you will, fiscal entities behind it, so they're not going to merge. But under the auspices of any approval, I understand that this can all happen at the same time at the registry. So you've got the subdivision going to the registry. It doesn't become de facto until it's signed, sealed, and delivered, and then all of that happens at once. The consolidation and the re-subdivision into two lots and a parent lot. So I probably already...
3 lots then.
Well, 3, yeah, two lots and a remainder lot, 2 new lots and a remainder lot.
So that would be one condition? Or
Oh, yes, no,
So
no,
there's-
it's got to proceed that way, or it's crazy.
Okay. Is there a way to concisely word that?
Well, it would be a consolidation and re-subdivision proceeding, I guess.
Subject to
And you have that-
consolidation and,
It's a title of the plan. Yes. This project is Riverside Landing subdivision and consolidation plan. So consolidation and re-subdivision covers aspects of what we're...
so one condition would be the consolidation, re-subdivision after pads or the site.
They can do what they want. It's their land. The whole issue of premises were, as I understand it, the ability to move that material within the original parameters of the lot, and was it legal or was it not? Because did the subdivision application make it be off-premise?
Subject to consolidation in re-subdivision, there's one. What else did we have 1 through 5 or 1 through?
All state, local, and federal permits, including alteration of terrain, the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. This is just what came up before. All required agreements with the town, including all easements, and construction, surety. It's probably more site plan, but it doesn't hurt to have it in there. That's essentially a bond.
Department of Transportation, you said?
Yeah.
DOT,
Yeah, there were some clerical errors.
DOT approval?
Subject to, state, local, and federal.
That would be all included under state and local.
State, local, and federal, because you're going to need different.
So we don't have to specifically mention DOT. Okay.
There were some clerical corrections regarding abutters, so any clerical corrections that were noted on the plan. Most importantly, all town engineer questions and concerns satisfied. town engineer review questions and concerns satisfied. And that's all I had. I don't know if anyone else has anything else.
Okay, excuse me, just for clarification, we say town engineer recommendations. Are we referring to the July 11th, 2012 letter?
There were two letters.
Well, there is a subdivision letter and there is a site plan letter.
There are actually four letters. There is a subdivision letter, I believe that's July 11th.
Yeah.
And the applicant did do some, whatever, answered the request of the town engineer. And then Mike Vignali, the town engineer, put out another memo on August 8th. It says we have reviewed the revised 17-sheet plan.
Okay.
And then, I believe it was August 14th for the two site plan reviews. So there are four review letters from the engineer, but we're not dealing with site plan at this point. So you're looking at those two.
Okay. So it looks like we have 4 conditions that would be considered for the conditional approval, correct?
You need to include, I had mentioned all required agreements with the town of Plymouth, including the development agreement, and this is boilerplate, but I want it
Would
iterated.
that be part of the local permit?
It's not a permit.
Okay,
No.
so 5.
Condition.
Town, what was the
All required town agreements, including development agreement, any required construction or drainage easement agreements,
What was the first one before drainage?
construction or drainage agreements.
No.
That's okay. Just pretend you're left-handed.
All
And
required town agreements, construction,
drainage, and a surety, which is essentially a letter of credit or a bond. And I just want to say this to the board. The premise put forward in their project includes a maintenance agreement, a defined, clearly defined, articulated, drawn-out maintenance agreement for all the drainage. So that's already in there, but that would be included also.
So construction, drainage, surety, and, or that's all,
That's
that's,
it.
okay. All right. So, Mr. Renlet, would you be willing to, what's the term?
Amend,
Amend?
yes.
The motion to include these 5 conditions.
You want to read those?
Yes. Number 1, subject to consolidation and re-subdivision, all state, local, and federal permits, including alteration of terrain and Department of Transportation, they sign off, Department of Transportation
Permits.
permits. Number 3, clerical corrections. Number 4, town engineer review questions have been satisfied from the letter of August 8th. And number 5, all required town agreements consisting of construction, drainage, and a surety. Obtaining all required town agreements, or what's the word we're looking for? All town.
That's fine, I'll wordsmith it, but the conditional approval must include the word shall, because otherwise it's just guidance. So the conditional
Shall.
approval shall.
Include. Sound good?
Agree.
Mr. Roach?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the subdivision in front of us with those 5 conditions just mentioned, signify by saying aye. Oh,
And one more further point under discussion.
yes.
At the planning board's last week's meeting on this matter, on more than one occasion, by more than one member of this board, it was mentioned that there was difficulty in dealing with the question of the lack of a long-term plan for either these particular 2 to 3 lots that we're talking about with this particular consolidation, or with how this particular development as a whole fits into The character of the Tenny Mountain, I'll use the word corridor, and I sensed that there was an apprehension to move on this particular vote that we're about to do, just because we didn't have a clarity or a picture of what the future might look like for this particular parcels, these particular parcels, or indeed even the corridor down there. As already has been said, we have to deal with what we have in front of us. And we also have a further matter that complicates this. Under our zoning and also with our subdivision regulations, it speaks to both of those speak to the subject of impact fees. This particular highway corridor is a state highway corridor, which means that we are compelled to coordinate with the state on any of these matters. And the definitions that are in both of our documents here that speak to impact fees talk in particular about the town's assets. And yet we have a question in mind about what's going to happen as we continue to build out with the, I'll use somebody else's expression, the piecemeal lots that we're seeing show up, in way it's going to impact that corridor that ultimately the town is going to have to coordinate with the highway department on, and there are going to be costs that are going to have to be dealt with. I bring that up because it was a subject that there was a great deal of concern about that was reached. But again, in this particular instance, we don't have the ability through the subjects of the impact fees to deal with that. And as the town planner has previously already pointed out, the revisiting of that corridor study to determine what we believe the character should be is going to take a while. With that in mind, I intend to vote in support of the proposal that we've got in front of us.
Seeing no other comments at this time. Is there?
That's it?
If there is no other comments on the item to vote on, then we will again vote, or we will vote. All those in favor of the approval of the application, subdivision application in front of us with those 5 conditions signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Wilson, any abstain?
So there was one.
Mr. Kelly, you were
Aye.
aye.
2, 6.
6 yes, 1 no. That brings us to B, under administrative matters. Site plan review, Lot 1 of the Light subdivision for a fast food restaurant. McDonald's, single-story, 3,905 square foot building off a private drive at the intersection of Tenny Mountain Highway and Highland Street, PID 212-046/047. Sharon, would you give us an overview of this?
Yes, just 1 second. Shut that here.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Kelly.
Yes, well, she's looking that up. On this, to go back to this premise, does that have to do with one owner, or does that have to do with more than one owner? In other words, if I owned a piece of property and I want to transport some earth down to a different piece of property, if I was both the same owner, would that be the premise? Or if I was X owner and Y owner, so that if I was going to build a building and I want to get land from somebody else, is that the same premise? The definition of premise. I know everybody said it's very clear here on the last page, but I still don't quite understand it. It doesn't say the same owner or a variation of owners.
Mr. Wilson, you want to try and answer that?
Well, perhaps to reinforce it, I'd say that people who were looking for clarity found it, because the final sentence of our attorney's recommendation is, to paraphrase, to say, this one's okay. But what I was seeking, and I think what Mr. Kelly clearly seeking is an operating guideline that will help us in the future, because there are many other situations you can imagine that will be somewhat different from this. And that's what I did not find any clarity at all in this letter. So I understand that he's telling us in the final sentence, this one's okay. But as far as an operating guideline is concerned, it's missing, and I think we still need to seek that.
Yeah, and I would like to see that defined in the zoning regulations for Plymouth. That would make it a lot easier in the future.
Oh, I'm sorry, back to work. We have, of course I won't be able to find it, a narrative description. I can paraphrase it, but you were given a narrative description in one of your many packages. No, not necessarily that. That's all right, I'll just paraphrase. Actually, I won't take that. The proposed site plan for Lot 1 is a 3,905 square foot McDonald's restaurant on the lot, which is 1.34 acres. This will be accessed by a common private drive off Tenny Mountain Highway to be constructed by the applicant, and also at the intersection of Tenny Mountain Highway and its existing traffic signal with Highland Street, that traffic signal to be upgraded at this point. This project will require a full technical review by the town's engineer, Michael Vignali. The site plans are feasible in terms of meeting the primary zoning requirements, including lot size, setback, and impervious surface coverage with appropriate zoning, which is agricultural. There is more than sufficient acreage for setbacks, frontage, construction pad, runoff storage, and interior and exterior Tenny Mountain Highway traffic requirements. Parking requirements from the Plymouth zoning ordinance are met and exceeded. However, the town's engineer has some specific points of interest, which will be discussed later on tonight, or perhaps at the next meeting, because I do expect this will be continued for site plan review, and we will have the town's engineer here at that point. DOT is reviewing the permit application for intersection restriping and upgrading of the traffic signals. Alteration of terrain permitting from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services is underway. And the area of disturbance for both the fast food restaurant and the next site plan review is listed as, disturbance is listed at 53,000 square feet. Specifics of floodplain storage and pad preparation excavation is approximately 57,000 cubic yards. A long-term drainage maintenance agreement will be required, as I said earlier, as will be other agreements with the town. Jurisdictional wetlands located on either of those parcels will not be affected by this project. So in addition to the ESC, we have jurisdictional wetlands, those won't be touched. This project does not come into conflict with the Airport Overlay District regulations. Parking requirements exceed, as I said, landscaping appears to be quite comprehensive, not stingy at all, and the dark skies lighting is provided for. So that's about all I have. And of course, all of this, as we said before, is subject to alteration of terrain permit for starters.
Okay, at this time, we would like to have the applicant come forward and make a presentation.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Lewis from North Point Engineering. Just to clarify what you're seeking right now from me, are we going through the checklist as we did similar to, or would you like a presentation of the project? I know the application has not been accepted, or is it accepted under the old,
I don't think you need to go
Okay.
in as much detail as you did the last.
It's a different application.
It's a site plan application, I just want to make sure that it's being accepted for public hearing and review, so, I mean, similar to the subdivision application, we did submit a comprehensive set of site improvement plans, which you should all have before you. This is the set right here. Has been reviewed by the town engineer, and as Sharon just went through a lot of the items I was going to touch on in the presentation, we believe we have submitted all the required information, all the checklist items, in going through the checklist as part of the site plan application. Some of the things don't apply, such as septic fields and the like, because we do have water and sewer available to this site. We have submitted for the state alteration of terrain permit. As I mentioned, as part of the subdivision application, we have one alteration of terrain permit that encompasses the subdivision improvements as well as both of the site plans. That is in review at DES. The off-site plans at intersection is part of the DOT permit, which is really tagged to the subdivision plan, but DOT will be reviewing both of these site plan applications as well, because they have access onto the shared driveway. So short of going through all of the checklist items, which I'm happy to do, I believe that we have met all of them, and I believe that Sharon has agreed with that.
I feel you have, but it's up to the
So
board.
unless you want me to go right into the presentation, I'm happy to do that.
I think the board would be satisfied to just go right into the presentation unless, yeah.
Okay, sure. So this is one of the plans I presented to you last week as part of the subdivision application. This is the two pads, the two lots that we're creating as part of the subdivision, which you just approved. And as part of that subdivision, the shared drive, which we have identified as private drive A, which we're calling the main entrance, and then this private drive B will both be constructed as part of the subdivision improvements. All of the fill will be brought in to raise this site up to a pad elevation above the floodplain. All that's part of the subdivision applications, which brings us right into this lot here, proposed lot 1, which is 1.34 acres. As Sharon mentioned, it meets the zoning requirements for lot size and the likes. So on that lot, moving forward, this proposed fast food restaurant, which will be a McDonald's restaurant. This is the layout. It's a very prototypical McDonald's restaurant with a dual drive-through lane around the backside of the building, which is what you see at the newer McDonald's. So it's a 2-lane drive-through with 2 separate order windows. Back here, the lane kind of splits apart, comes back around into one once it gets down to the pickup window. So it's basically a one-way circulation around the site in this counterclockwise direction around the building. We'll have two driveway ingress egresses off of this northerly private drive here. So folks coming into the site will come in the main drive, have to turn left, and can come in, for the most part, will be coming in this way and driving, circulating around the building like that. There is a secondary access back here as well. And we are proposing just an egress out here for folks that are coming through the drive-through. They can get right back out onto the main access, and that's a point that was further discussed as part of the town engineer's comments, because he had a comment on that. But basically, it's a pretty straightforward fast food restaurant site, I believe. I want to talk a little bit about the grading and drainage, utilities, landscaping. You can see the landscaping is shown on this site. We believe we do have a comprehensive landscape plan. It exceeds the requirements of the town. It's really intended to meet the corporate requirements for McDonald's. So we feel that is more than adequate for this site. Drainage on the site, as you recall, may recall from the presentation last week, half of the driveways here of the shared drives will be draining onto the site. So the southerly half of this private drive B will be draining onto the site, and half of the shared drive here will be draining onto this site. We do have curb on the site and catch basins and storm drains, so all the runoff from all of the drives, all of the on-site areas will be collected in a series of on-site catch basins and storm drains and be brought down to a underground subsurface retention basin right down in this area of the site, which is comprised of the storm tech chambers, which are the plastic open bottom chambers to allow the stormwater to infiltrate back into the groundwater. So and that is sized to take all the runoff from the site and put it back into the ground for I believe it's a 25-year storm event. There is an overflow for that, which will drain back into the DOT ditch and continue easterly, which is where it goes today. One thing to point out with that, which was a concern expressed last week, as you recall, is we are in an aquifer here, and although there are no town requirements to treat the drainage or the runoff, we are required from DES to provide stormwater treatment. So prior to that, all that stormwater getting into those subsurface chambers, there is a treatment mechanism. It's called the water quality unit. It's a large structure similar to a septic tank. It's a proprietary device that goes underground, so that all that stormwater will be routed through that. It separates out the oil and the gas and the sediment for sediment removal, so that the water that's going into the chambers and then into the ground has already been treated. So that's one of the things that DES will be looking at, that the town engineer has looked at and commented on. He does have a couple of comments on that. He'd like us to just clarify some of the design on the plans. So I just wanted to point that out. We are recharging the runoff from the site, which is good for the aquifer, and we are treating that water prior to going back into the ground, which is good for the aquifer. So that's basically the drainage in a nutshell. Utilities, as you may recall, we're extending water, sewer up the private drive from existing mains that are across Tenny Mountain Highway. We'll need approval from Plymouth Village Water and Sewer for that. And as part of the subdivision, we're proposing stubs to each of the 2 lots. So this set of plans includes basically connections to the building from those mains that will be running up the drive. We also have utilities. There's overhead utilities in Tenny Mountain Highway right now. We'll be extending those underground onto the site and to the 2 pad sites and to the restaurant from those services in Tenny Mountain Highway. Sharon mentioned lighting. I think maybe not. We do have a lighting plan as part of that site plan package. It's a pretty standard lighting package, cutoff fixtures, dark skies compliant. I think we meet what the town is looking for in terms of that. Nothing will be projected up into the air. Let's see. And then we do have the letter from Mike McNally. If you like, I'd like to just read through that and comment on some of his comments.
Is that August 19th?
That's the
13th, I'm sorry.
It's August 13th. Trying to find it here. August 13th letter. He has 11 comments on the McDonald site plan technical review. For the most part, I mean, in general, we have no issues with these comments. Our plan would be to address all of these comments. But just going through them, his first general comment is regarding the one-way access drive to private drive A, which I pointed out is right here. This is that egress we have out onto the main driveway. And his comment is that it's about 60 feet from the stop bar out here at the intersection, and he felt that was too close, that it was going to be be difficult for people coming out of this lane to make it over into the right turn lane at the intersection, which I think is a valid comment. We did have our traffic consultant take a look at that, and I've talked to DOT about that. And what we're going to try to do is increase that distance from 60 feet to 100 feet, which is what DOT would like to see. And there's 2 things we can do. We actually have some flexibility with the stop bar location out here at the intersection, sliding that a little bit closer to the intersection. And this lane actually can be moved back a little bit. It'll actually line up a little bit better with the drive-through lane, and we feel like we can get that 100-foot separation. If we can get that, we feel that DOT will approve that access there. So obviously we'd have to take that back to Mike McNally. We're hopeful that would satisfy his concern with that driveway as well. Item number 2 pertains to the sidewalk. As you recall, we talked about the sidewalk. That was a comment that he had on the subdivision application. And as that would pertain to this plan, our proposal to you last week was if we were to do a sidewalk, we prefer it to be on the McDonald's side of the drive and cross over here. What we're willing to do at this point, what we'd like to do is just make sure we reserve enough room for a 4 or 5 foot sidewalk adjacent to the curb. We may have to just shift some of these plantings back a little bit just to make sure we keep that space in there. Our preference again right now would be to not construct that sidewalk at this point, as we are not planning to construct any crosswalk across the street. But that's something I think we need some feedback from on the board again. I think he's just pointing it out. As he says, if the planning board decides to require pedestrian access, we'll need to accommodate that. So we're willing to do what we need to do. That would just be our preference at this time. Item number 3, stop or yield sign is required at the driveway, the private driveway. He's just talking again, right at this driveway. We would need to have we failed to identify a stop sign at that driveway, which we need to add to the plan. We recognize that, and we'll certainly do that. Item number 4, all sign types must be called off on the plans, and sizes of all signs must be added to the plans and details. I believe we included standard details for the signs on the subdivision application, on the subdivision plans, and we need to indicate them on this set of plans as well, because they do pertain to the site. We've noted signs on the site plan, but we just need to add the details for them, which we recognize. Items 5 through 11 pertain to the drainage design. And he's talking about, in item number 5, the bottom of the infiltration basin is located about 2 feet below the existing surface grade, and he's talking about having test pits to verify what the water table is at that location. That is something that we actually have to do as part of the DES permit. You may recall we had a discussion about that last week, sort of, in that we're taking the material from the back portion of the overall site and bringing it in here. And we had those temporary basins as part of the subdivision, and he was concerned about how fast that material would be able to infiltrate. It's similar concern here. We'll actually be down in the native material at the bottom of these basins, and we just need to make sure that we're not in the water table. DES will be requiring that we do test pits on that, and we'll be planning to do that as soon as we have approval on the site. So that's something we are planning on doing. Number 6, drainage from the proposed access road flows into the proposed site development drainage system. As I mentioned, runoff from this half of the road and this half of the road drains onto the site. Since the main access driveway and associated drainage is on a separate lot from this development, easements and maintenance agreements are required that include the infiltration area and all portions of the drainage system that are common to both lots. We absolutely recognize that. I pointed that out as part of the subdivision. There will be both access easements and drainage easements that need to be prepared as part of this site plan subdivision package for that exact reason. There is runoff coming from the shared drive onto both lots, so there will need to be the maintenance plan in place with easements that ensure the perpetual maintenance of the drainage there. So that's definitely something that would need to be a condition of any approval on this. We do have a long-term maintenance plan prepared as part of the alteration of terrain application, which DES requires us to prepare, so that is in the material that's been submitted to you, but the easements would need to be prepared subsequent to a site plan approval. Item number 7, construction notes on sheet 4, revised reference for drain manhole is what DMH is, 27 to number 6. There's a typo on the plan. And then again, there was a typo on the plan. It didn't quite match the calculations. I took a look at that already, and that's something we can easily take care of. It was a good catch. Shouldn't be an issue. Similar to a couple of the other ones. Number 8, again, there was an error in the calculations that we had prepared for the drainage. I took a look at that after receiving this letter from Mr. Vignali, ran the calculations again, and it really doesn't affect the final design. So we'd obviously have to submit those to him, which we have not done at this point. for his final sign-off. But I don't expect there to be any issue with that. Number 9 says that the plans call for land saver 3051 infiltration units. The calculations indicate StormTech SC 7040 units. Please clarify which units will be used for this project. Those are basically the same type of units. They're just manufactured by 2 different companies that have now been consolidated into one company. So we just need to clarify the notes on the plans. That was just a oversight on the initial set of plans. I don't expect it to be an issue. Number 10 is regarding the water quality unit. That's the treatment device that we have to treat the stormwater. And he just wants us to add some additional notes regarding the manufacturer's recommendations for maintenance and contact information, just so there's more information on the plans about that, which we're easily able to accommodate. And the last item, number 11, reference the inspection and maintenance plan on the drawings and clarify who is responsible for the work. That's pretty much tied to note number 6 above with regards to the easements and the maintenance of the drainage system. So he just wants to make sure that it's clear on the plans who's responsible for what on here. So that's something we definitely we can add a elaborative note to the site plan to take care of that. So, in general, I think that these are all pretty standard engineering comments that we could address with Mike Vignali. We would be looking for some input back from you on the sidewalk issue. But aside from that one, I think it's all items we can handle with through him. And with that, that's all I have. Take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the board for the applicant? Mr. Wilson?
Start off with one obvious question the number of townspeople have asked. We've got a McDonald's in town. Is that one going to be closed down in favor of this, or are we going to have 2?
I believe, and the McDonald's representatives are not here, the intent is for that building to be, and you correct me if I'm wrong, to be relocated to this one, so there would just be one.
Just be one. And do we know anything about the intended hours of operation of this McDonald's?
No, I don't have an answer for that right now. I would expect that it would be similar to what the hours of operation at the other McDonald's are, which I could not tell you offhand. I wish they were here. Yeah. But we can certainly get that information.
Do you have an answer?
No, I just think I saw from driving by, if it is in fact, which we don't know, the same hours of operation. They're open quite late. Seems to be a new policy at McDonald's, at least for drive-through or something like that.
Any more questions? Yes, Mr. Roach.
Yes, I'd just like to make a comment on that little driveway that town engineer would like to relocate. I think I would agree that should be moved. I think the way people drive, that'd be a problem coming out and trying to get access to those lanes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys can move that back to your 100 feet, I think that's very important. So.
All right. At this point, it appears you've given the report on, as far as the planner's report, that it appears to be completed. So at this point, if someone from the board would like to make a motion to accept as complete.
I'll make a motion to accept the application as complete.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Inlet. Any discussion? All those in favor of accepting the application as complete signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That brings us to is there any more comments before we open up to a public hearing to discuss? Ready? Here we go. It is 7:21 and we open meeting up for a public hearing. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak in favor of the application? Citizens first. Yes.
Put Crane 84 Island Street. I think it's a good project. It's there are good commercial businesses in the town now, and that's the area they should develop. I speak in favor of the project.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the applicant? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Yes.
My name's Connor Baldwin. I live out on Fairgrounds Road, 375 Fairgrounds Road. First, I'd like to just quickly address the fact that you've all brought up that you have to deal with what's in front of you, and that's a reality all planning boards everywhere have to do. You do have to look at things as they come along. You don't have the luxury of looking into the future. But I would propose that's all the more reason to stick with what you have already and not make up rules on the fly that have far-reaching implications until you have had time to sit back and discuss the implications of those far-reaching decisions. The town of Plymouth already has a master plan. The master plan calls for development on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway, with a few exceptions. A little bit to the west, where there are some grandfathered businesses. It makes clear that the town can have it both ways. They can have their cake and eat it too. We have great natural vistas, and we have lots of developable land. And we don't have to ruin our town. We don't have to cut the branch that we're sitting on, economically speaking. You all know that New Hampshire depends in a large part on tourism for our economy. People come up to get away from places that have sprawl and have McDonald's every 20 feet. Plymouth is going to be just like Lowell or Manchester or any other place, and they're not going to be flocking here. This is what gives Plymouth its character. In the very first page of the Plymouth zoning ordinances, it says that the regulations are designed to preserve Plymouth's small town atmosphere and attractive natural setting. And it stresses throughout that it is in accordance with the master plan. Throughout the Plymouth master plan are references to preserving Plymouth's natural heritage. Pages 4, 6, 15, 24, 25, 32 through 34, and 45 all stress the importance and the prominence of preserving natural resources as a goal. And it doesn't need to conflict with development. There is lots of land here for development. And people that stress that or suggest that this is an attempt to thwart development are putting words in their mouth that simply are not there. So I resent the fact that the suggestion that the preservation of natural resources has to compete with development is absurd. I think we can have it both, and the master plan makes that clear. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Yes.
Hi, I'm Paul Phillips, resident of Plymouth, 35 Ash Hill Road. I would just echo what Garth has said. It's unfortunate that we're taking a really beautiful view shed of the Baker Valley and putting the McDonald's there. I understand that it's a good commercial business, but it already exists in town. This is doing needless development to move McDonald's from a perfectly good location into the middle of a beautiful River Valley view shed. I think we have a master plan for a reason. Our site plan review regulations require you to explain how this site plan conforms to the master plan. The zoning ordinance requires you to adhere to the master plan to the maximum extent possible. Your site plan review regulations call for you to maximize the preservation of existing topography, vegetation, and natural habitat, provide for open spaces and green spaces of adequate proportions, and encourage the reuse and rehabilitation of existing structures. That's the front of your site plan review regulation, section 2, sub E, F, and I. Here you're taking an existing structure, which is perfectly adequate, seems to be a going business, doing good business. I take my kids there, And all you're doing is moving it down into our floodplain, into the Vapor Valley viewshed. It doesn't seem to me that you're all conforming to these requirements in your site plan regulations. And I'd like to explain that, since the site plan regulations require you to explain how this conforms to the master plan. So before you take that vote, I would encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to this in the back?
Hello, my name is Quentin Blaine. I live in Buckland Ave in Plymouth. I echo Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Phillips' comments on the master plan and the zoning ordinance. And I think that this board should really strongly consider requiring, making sure, rather than trying to stretch the zoning ordinance of the master plan to allow the project to fit it, maybe the project needs to be revised to fit the master plan and the zoning ordinance. And I think those documents are the voice of the residents of this town about what's supposed to happen. I think the board is critical in making sure that happens. One of my particular comments about the plan itself is that there's going to be an engineered stormwater system to allow the water to be filtered before it is put back into the earth and eventually down to the aquifer where our drinking water is taken from. If I heard correctly, I think it's for a 25-year event. I think that that's insufficient. When you get to deliberating on this, that's insufficient. We're around the country, around the world, we're having much more major events than 25-year events. And what's going to happen when we have a really big event and we need this site? If it's engineered for 25 and it gets overrun, then you'll take a surety bond, and that'll be like getting hit by a car and getting some money for your like that. If you take a look at the site, it's pretty obvious the significant amount of fill that's going to be necessary to bring it up to be even with the road. There's a real deep drop-off off the Kenny Mountain Highway into that field. So it is going to change the terrain. It is going to affect our floodplain, and that's a very valuable, the floodplain proven to be very valuable to this town during over the past couple of years, especially with the Irene storm. One other thing to consider as you look towards your deliberations in this is whether a roundabout should be required by the developer. Mr. Gosney spoke and mentioned piecemeal. He didn't indicate he thought this was piecemeal, but if you're going to really start into approving a lot here or a lot there, I mean, how many traffic lights are we going to have along Green Mountain Highway? A longer rated plan would be for a roundabout that would not require traffic to stop. Now we have 4 right in line there. And as you get more traffic and you get a 4th entrance way onto that freeway light, it's just going to take longer and longer to get through town. And that's something to consider as the development increases the potential aspect of the area. That's a major corridor. You get out to West Plymouth and Rumney and Warren and all those places up towards there. So it should be kept as free as possible to keep traffic moving rather than idling at stop limits. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition?
Yes, my name is Chris Mumford. I live here in Plymouth on Highland Street, and I speak in opposition to this project. There's nothing that I've heard here tonight that I think honors the spirit of our town's master plan, and I would like to hear this board address that and explain how we are preserving our natural spaces, utilizing existing structures and improvements, and doing that in a way that's compatible with all of our rules that we have in place. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wanted to speak in opposition to the application? Seeing none, then...
I just have 2 more letters to mention.
Sure.
The board has received 2 more letters from citizens one from a Mr. Burho in support of this project, and one from a Mr. Card in support of this project. And of course, all those letters are available for public scrutiny anytime.
Anyone wishing to speak of a general nature about the project? At this point, I will allow the applicant to address any of the issues that were brought up.
Thank you. I just wanted to, one of the marvels of modern technology, I was able to get an answer to Mr. Wilson's question about the hours of operation. 5 a.m. to midnight, 5 a.m. to 12 a.m. is the standard hours of operation for McDonald's.
7 days a week?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Several comments regarding the master plan. I guess I'll leave it up to I read through the master plan. I think there's some excerpts read. I don't have that in front of me right now, but last week when it came to the subdivision, as far as I'm concerned, for this application, we're dealing with a 1.3 acre commercial lot that has been approved, an approved lot by the planning board just moments ago. So we're not talking about the overall parcel anymore. We're just talking about this lot with the assumption that it has been a created lot. So obviously, a condition of this approval would be that that subdivision needs to take effect. So you look at the master plan, I'm looking at a 1 acre commercial lot that the planning board has already approved. My interpretation of that master plan, and as I said last week, in looking at Tenny Mountain Highway, it's a commercial corridor. This is one of the pieces of property on there that remains available for development. It's clearly, in the past has been proposed for development. I believe, and I don't want to quote the master plan, but in looking at this area, it defined Tenny Mountain Highway as the northern boundary of a commercial zone. My interpretation of that would be Tenny Mountain Highway, the properties along Tenny Mountain Highway are the northern boundary of a commercial zone, not actually the center line of the highway and everything to the south of it. Now, I wasn't part of the preparation of the master plan, but that would seem logical to me, since there are commercial properties up and down the north side of Tenny Mountain Highway. It would only make sense for the properties in between them to be commercial. So that's how I interpret that. The properties up to Tenny Mountain Highway, and obviously once you get north of Tenny Mountain Highway, you're dealing with residential properties and at the other side of the river. So I think we're consistent with the master plan in terms of proposing commercial development within a commercial area. On this particular lot, it's a 1 acre commercial lot. It's not, any open space preservation would be associated with the subdivision that we already talked about, where we were only proposing development on a very small aspect of that lot at this point. The vast majority of that process is remaining as open space, but we're not talking about that now. We're just talking about this small lot. So I think that we are, in my opinion, clearly meeting the master plan, the intent of the master plan, by developing a commercial property that's in a current commercial zone, or a zone that allows the use right now. Questions about the drainage and the 25-year storm. I may have misspoke. I'm not sure exactly what I said. My intent was that we're taking the majority of the stormwater up to a 25-year storm and infiltrating into the ground, which is a lot of water. So basically, what you're saying is that in standard rain events, a typical rain event, the water that would fall on that site is going to continue to be recharged into the ground. It will not be running off the site down into the river, which is a concern on developments, is that you're creating all this impervious area, and all this water that's landing on that site that normally today would be infiltrated into the ground and recharge the aquifer is now being sent off to the river and going downstream. But we're not doing that. We're taking that water from rain today, tomorrow, the next day. 98% of the rain events that happen in the year, all that water is going to go into the ground. If there's a flood, if there's a 100-year storm or something greater than that, the system is designed to handle that. It has an overflow that's designed to discharge out to the drainage swale, goes back to the river. But we are required to design for greater than a 25-year storm, and we do. In this particular case, we don't have any downstream abutters that we're concerned about. We're right adjacent to the river. It's going into the wetland, into the Oxmoor, into the river. But we do have to meet DES requirements for channel protection and peak runoff control and the likes, which for them are for a 50-year storm. 100-year, we are in the floodplain. Obviously, as we mentioned, as part of the subdivision, we're taking that material from the floodplain to fill the lot here, which is happening as part of the subdivision application, and we are providing compensatory storage in the floodplain. So during that flood event that does occur, as we all know, there will not be an effect to the floodplain because we're providing that compensatory mitigation area on the site. Roundabout was brought up. We actually talked about that at a conceptual meeting with the planning board, I think last winter. We did discuss that with DOT. It's not something that DOT is interested in at this intersection. It's already a signalized intersection, and we're proposing to upgrade the signals at the intersection, but it's not something that's on the table as far as DOT is concerned out there. It would, otherwise it would have been something that would have been strongly considered out there, but it's not applicable really for this intersection. And I think that's the notes that I took, unless I missed something.
Is there, at this point, anybody in favor of the application that would like to do a brief rebuttal? Those opposed would like to speak now? They have a brief period of time. Give you a minute or so, very brief.
Sure, I'll just reiterate what I said last week, that the standard you're asked to apply is not whether a particular application is consistent with the master plan. The standards in the site plan regulations are that we have to maximize the conformity to the master plan. We have to maximize the green space. These are not, is it just barely over the line good enough? The standard you have to apply is it done to the maximum extent possible? Thank you.
I have some clarification, if no one else needs to speak.
Yes, Ms. Penny.
There were some questions I forgot who asked. I'm not sure if it was Mr. Baldwin or Mr. Phillips, but we have been very generally discussing and looking at, on my level, a roundabout perhaps in the vicinity of Smithbridge Road. We're very well aware of the fact that, it is stacking up with traffic signals. However, as Mr. Lewis said, there is a pre-existing signal right there. And hopefully, I don't think you folks were here earlier, the planning board is charging itself with looking into convening a corridor study, a new corridor study on Route 25. The last one, I believe, was at least 9 years old from North Country Council. So we are taking that into consideration. And I guess I have a question for my own clarification. In my research, I've not come across any evidence of any conservation easements or acquisition of this land being put forth for conservation, preservation, or whatever. Does anyone with any on the board with any institutional memory from the Lowe's case from, let's say, then to now, know of anything? I haven't seen anything. I mean, that option having been there that could possibly address the fact that these gentlemen are concerned with in terms of preserving the landscape out there. I mean, was something put forth and defeated at town meeting, or I haven't seen any indication. So, I mean, it's just, you would know.
Yeah, there was discussion at a Conservation Commission meeting in 2004, but of course the land had value, and if a conservation easement were placed on the land, then that would prohibit or limit any development of it, and so it would diminish the value of the land. So basically it would cost money to put it under conservation easement, and the Conservation Commission did not have funds to be able to do it.
Because it just seems like it's an obvious problem, issue, conflict. I just didn't know if I was missing something.
Well, it's a perennial problem in Plymouth is lack of funds, and it probably would have been proposed if we thought the town of Plymouth could afford to either buy the lot or put it under conservation easement, but it was not was considered to be not feasible.
Mr. Gosling?
When the previous application was in front of us for this part of the town, we keep using the term of Lowe's project, and I'll use that term just so we know what we're talking about. The final outcome that enabled, I believe, a successful vote to occur on moving forward with that project was the agreement that I'm going to round approximately 50-some of the 70-some acres that were involved in that submittal would be placed in conservation. For me, anytime you have 70-some acres and you're only going to develop 20-some and commit to the idea, and I believe if you do your research, you will find under the conditional approvals that it did provide that conservation easement would be put in place as part of the approval process.
With the one, as one entity?
Yes, correct.
But nothing prior to the proposed development for Lowe's, when the land was just sitting there?
In order to get approval of the project, the site plan, yes, that was part of the conditional approval of the site plan.
No, I understand that, and I was aware of that. I meant prior to or after Lowe's left town, I wasn't aware of anything.
No, it was part of that application,
Right.
and like you've already
I think-
indicated, that application is no longer in front of us.
I think Ms. Penny was wondering if before Lowe's even came to Plymouth to even discuss that lot, whether that land, whether there was discussion about putting that under any type of easement at that time, when before it had changed hands to the person that owns it now. I think that's what the,
But that's institutional memory I don't have.
I don't know. Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Bishop.
I believe that was just one of the ideas to allow the process of Lowe's plan. One of the plans was to have athletic fields there, and then it was changed into some kind of environmental type of area. So this was only part of the process of approving the plan. I believe, and tell me I'm wrong if I am, we have a letter from a person, a resident of Plymouth, that indicated that this land, prior to Mr. McKinley owning it, this land was owned by another gentleman, and that gentleman was offered an easement plan, and he decided to sell it for commercial land. And I believe that's in the letter.
It's part of,
Huh?
yes.
Is there any possible way we could read that letter so the public would know exactly that there was a consideration, but that it was decided by that owner to sell it as commercial land?
I don't know if that's fact, I just don't know. I hate to, we're still in hearing. So if there's anyone else in the public that would like to speak in opposition, a brief rebuttal, they can do so now before we close the public hearing portion of the meeting. Seeing none, time is 7:50, and I close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Yes, Ms. Bishop.
Yeah, just to follow up with when I was going to speak after him, actually with the same issue that he brought up. This letter that he is in response to, because you had a question about conservation, whether they ever had any acknowledgement prior to even the owner. And this letter here indicates, right here, when the subject property was offered for sale by Batchelder as a commercial lot.
Excuse me, Rhonda, would you read the date and who it's from, please?
Unfortunately,
It's down at the bottom.
Thursday, August 30th, 2012. It's addressed to the planning board, and this is by Jack and Dana Armstrong. Indicate they're a longtime residents of the town of Plymouth. This is an email. This email is to support the proposed subdivision for the Riverside Landing LLC, the former Lowe's site. And listed below are the reasons why, when the subject property was offered for sale by Judge Batchelder as a commercial lot, and before it was bought by Mr. McGinley, I, Dana Zach Armstrong, called a member of the Conservation Committee in Plymouth and informed them of the possible sale. At the time, I was informed that the committee did not have the resources to buy this property and secure its future to remain in the natural state. He indicates what is important here is that at the time, Judge Batchelor had the option and the opportunity to put the land in deeded conservation, but he did not. He chose to sell it as a commercial priced property and was thus compensated for his commercial value. At this point, too, we should not forget the consistent Supreme Court decision relative to the legal issues of use of the land. I'll just finish it, but I just want to get that point across. Our issue is an issue of fairness and respect for the Superior Court decisions. We feel that at this time that the planning board should approve this subdivision and end this 8-year-long process, which has cost the town, the taxpayers, and Mr. McGinley substantial amounts of money. Sincerely, Jack and Dana Armstrong. But, yeah, so.
Yes, sir. Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that letter because I believe it contains a glaring factual error. I was a member of the Conservation Committee at that time, and I know the member of the Conservation Commission who was being referred to in the letter, who is now deceased. That piece of property was owned by a group of several people. There was not a single owner. And at the time, he approached William Batchelder about the purchase of that property or about the placement of under an easement. He no longer had any ownership interest in it at all. He had been several years out of it. So it was owned by different parties. So what happened was the this commissioner made an approach to that individual who was mentioned in the letter, found out that he was no longer an owner, so then he made an approach to the other owners of the lot and was rebuffed. So that's my understanding of the situation because I was on the Conservation Commission then, and I talked to the commissioner who made that approach. So since the letter has been read in open meeting, I just wanted to point out that I believe that it's factually in error.
Any other discussion? Yes.
I have a question I'm not sure if the applicant can answer, but do we know what's going to happen to the old McDonald's building when they complete this and close it?
I do not.
Not? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Gosnell.
I think it would be helpful to respond to a number of items that were raised by those who chose to speak in opposition to this application. And I made several notes as they were being raised, and I'd like to take a moment, a few moments, to actually touch on 4 of the items that were spoken to. On more than one occasion, there was references to the master plan and ensuring that we were indeed conforming to the master plan, and in one instance, it was stated that we should be working toward seeing that the application achieved the maximum level of conformance. I use the emphasis on that word maximum. I think it's imperative that we actually speak to facts, and I'll start with the reference to our zoning that comes out of the master plan, and again reiterate what has been pointed out on a couple of occasions, including the applicant, that this parcel that we're considering now falls in the agricultural zone, and we will subsequently be hearing on a second parcel application. But in the agricultural zone, on page 15 of the current zoning, it specifically indicates that a drive-through restaurant is permitted. So in the first instance, from a zoning standpoint, we are conforming to that. If you look at the development of the master plan, which tries to address, and I say tries because it's a sometimes difficult subject, but it tries to address what's the vision of the town, and look at the language that appears in several different locations of the master plan. Under the subject of commercial, on page 13 of the master plan, it states, the major concentrations of commercial usage in the town of Plymouth are the traditional downtown center along Main Street and the commercial area 2 miles west of Interstate 93 along Tenny Mountain Highway. Further down on that same page, the commercial area along Tenny Mountain Highway generally begins west of the Baker River and extends west for 2 miles. If you continue on under the future use of potential development on page 15, this goes to a subject that was also broached not only in this meeting but last week's meeting. On page 15, under section C, future land use development potential under area 1, the most promising area of Plymouth with development potential is the general region bounded by Tenny Mountain Highway to the north, Clay Bog to the east, the junction of Pike Hill Road, Bell Road, Old Hebron Road to the south, and Bartlett-Yetton Road to the west. Keep in mind that is the general region. It does not exclude, as was perhaps inferred in last week's meeting, that development can or cannot occur on the other side of Tenny Mountain Highway. In fact, there has been a restaurant that was developed since this master plan was put into effect on the other side of the same side of the highway as this particular application is in front of us.
And let me interject one item, and then I'll let you continue.
Please.
And this is the same line of thought and the same points that were brought up by our planner at last week's meeting, talking about the same issues of the master plan. And but there still was some questions about the master plan, so I see it relevant to continue on and make sure that that point is that we are listening, and we're just trying to make sure that we define it for those that have still questions about whether this is following the master plan or not. Go ahead, Mr. Gosling.
There was another question that was raised that steps away from the master plan and zoning, and I think it would be helpful for the planning board and also for the citizens of the town. It's not the first instance in which we've had to deal with definitions of whether you have a 10-year event or a 25-year event when you're planning with how to deal with drainage issues. And I think it would be helpful if we were to have our town engineer clarify for us what typical standards are that are used, and when you move beyond the typical standard and provide an extraordinary level of support for drainage runoff. Quite frankly, I had forgotten what those standards are myself, so it would be very helpful for me to have our town engineer refresh us on those matters. So when we hear 25-year event, what does that actually mean? Also, on the highway development, with the subject of revisiting the corridor study, as the town planner has already pointed out, we are going to undertake a review of the corridor study that was done in 2004, and the decision that was reached subsequent to that, correct me, subject to check, I should say, I believe it was in 2007, after many hearings, the belief was by the then select board that the corridor would be best served by the use of lights. That was prior to the completion of the roundabout downtown. It was not in conformance with what the highway department engineers were recommending. They were recommending roundabouts with a divided highway. I know that was brought up by one individual here, and I believe that subject is one that we will undertake. But again, that's going to take us a period of time, and we have an application in front of us at this time in which the applicant has already stepped up to make improvements for it, accommodating a lighted intersection there, even though in the long term we may find that the best solution is a roundabout.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Wilson.
I had understood that we would have the town engineer present before we came to a vote on the site-specific plan. And the town engineer is not here tonight, so I feel a bit uncomfortable given that there are some open issues regarding drainage and events like a 25 or greater year flood. I think what we had last year was about a 25-year flood with Hurricane Irene. In the past 100 years, I think it was the fourth or fifth. It was the fourth or fifth largest storm. It wasn't the largest storm in the past 100 years. So that's why, if it's fourth or fifth, then I'm saying it's
Feels
in
like
the
25 years.
25th. But I mean, that's using some. That's not using precise mathematics. Certainly, if we were a little bit west of here in Vermont, that was a very, very significant event. So I would just make an observation that I'd feel a whole lot more comfortable if we had the town engineer here before we move forward for an approval of the site plan.
Could I speak to that, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman? I agree with Mr. Wilson. It was really hard to try to project the moving forward of this process, if at all, to whatever conclusion, and to try to gauge it. So I was not, by not having the town engineer here tonight nor last time, I was trying to preclude him sitting there at however many dollars an hour he gets and the mileage and not having any issues come before him. So that's definitely something that I agree with Mr. Wilson with, and I feel we should have our town engineer here. And I know that Mr. Vignelli would be very much willing to come. So I would agree with that. And it was just hard to gauge when you were going to be ready for him. So that's why he's not here.
Is there any reason why we couldn't, at this point, hear the site plan review for the other lot at this time and do the public hearing? And then once we can get the feedback from town engineer.
Continue it and then have your deliberations on both. Well,
I'll make the motion that we continue the deliberations on this application until a date certain that the town planner can arrange to have our town engineer here.
I second that motion.
just for discussion, our next regularly scheduled public hearing format meeting is September 20th, which is 2 weeks. Is that right? 2 weeks from today only?
Next one today, yeah.
Good Lord. Okay.
And I
Go ahead.
to add to that, I think it would be beneficial to have the town engineer be able to speak to both, so that if we could continue on
We can do both.
with the second site, get the hearing over with, I think that would be to the benefit of the applicant and those that came here tonight to make comments.
I'd be happy to make that motion when we get to that application.
So we're looking to continue.
So we have a motion on the table, and it's been seconded.
Right, and I'm discussing, but only perhaps a suggestion for an amendment to the motion
Yes.
to September 20th, our regularly scheduled meeting.
To September 20th, which would be our regular scheduled meeting. And site Lot 2 has no bearing on whether
No, we're
Lot
only
1 goes first.
Yeah, we're only talking about continuing
Lot 1.
Lot 1 right now.
Right. Okay. So by saying that we are continuing Lot 1 does not make any, has no bearing on Lot 2.
My understanding.
So we have a question from the applicant.
I just, if in the event that Mr. McNally is unable to attend the next meeting, could we request that if there are specific questions the board has relative to his memo that may be asked of him in advance? I mean, I'm just anticipating that he's not able to come to that meeting. My intent would probably be to address these comments and get them back to him for review so that he can
At least issue a,
prior to that meeting. But I just hate to come back and have it not here, but at least be able to move forward potentially.
And Mr. Gosling?
After hearing that, I anticipated I was going to raise this question on the Lot 2 application. Again, last week there was a good discussion that took place both in the presentation from the applicant and from comments that were raised by Mr. Kelly and others about sidewalks. And if you take a look at our site plan regulations, they do bring up the potential for the planning board to entertain the concept of an impact fee, where there are impacts to town facilities, and I'm referring to Highland Street at this time. That's an unanswered question, and the provisions in the site plan reviews enable the town planner to work with the town engineers and others to come up with reasonable cost estimates of what we might anticipate we would like to have occur when it becomes appropriate to extend those sidewalks. We're going to provide specifics to the town engineer. It would be my suggestion that we entertain that thought. We can actually attach it to Lot 2 if you want to, but we entertain that thought of asking for information, not only from our town engineer, but also from our highway department, what perhaps would be an appropriate design for extending the sidewalks into this part of the community from where they currently stop. And to try to get a figure associated with us considering whether or not there should be an impact fee as part of the conditional approval of the site plan.
My recollection last week was the applicant, let him kind of maybe speak if I'm not going to be clear enough. They're not sure what's going to happen down the road, and that Highland Street probably will at some point trigger some improvement there. I'm not sure how we can.
That's why I think it's questions asked posed to the engineer.
And that's, I probably would have voted no on continuing this, only because I'm not sure what new information the engineer, town engineer, is going to be able to provide that he doesn't already know. That brings up a good point. I'm not sure.
Well,
I just hate for the applicant to continue to come back, and it's costly to have his attorney, his engineer, his surveyor, and
perhaps I could help you make a decision by just citing 2 points. I did speak last Thursday to, definitely some sort of interior pedestrian circulation, because you've got 2 businesses, and if folks are going from A to B, I don't think they're going to necessarily be driving, so you will have some pedestrian traffic. That was my concern, interior as opposed to what I call exterior, which is outside the actual lots 1 and 2. Our police chief has concerns regarding implementing a de facto pedestrian crossing on Route 25. So
he would rather not see it. Because there would not be the signaling he'd rather see.
No, remember we had the conversation
Right,
of the signalization, but we don't have continuity at this point, so I mean, that's all I have to say.
So the only crossing that was in discussion at this point was from Lot 1 to Lot 2.
At this point in time.
Right. Mr. Kelly?
I believe that during the conversation of tonight, they said that we are supposed to only consider what is before us, not something that is going to be happening down the road somewhere. And that is not a problem that we are facing at the moment. So I don't believe, it's nice to think about it, but I don't believe that that should be considered in tonight's agenda.
My concern was the townspeople walking down Highland Street and walking to McDonald's and trying to navigate that road, Route 25.
Mr. Chair, the corridor study that we're anticipating,
Right.
that would definitely be
That's right.
an important facet for that to address, if that's any consolation. It needs redress, but
I'm not sure when the corridor study information would come out and whether McDonald's would already be built and the townspeople are...
But the signalized intersection have the capacity for future pedestrian phase, and the build-out of sidewalks would not be on the lot necessarily. If I get it right, we're talking exterior and interior pedestrian.
I'm talking exterior across 25.
That's the concept of impact fees.
Right.
Try to identify that. I will share this with you, having worked for a better part of 10 years on one side of Tenny Mountain Highway. On more than one occasion, you'll find a number of individuals who work on the opposite side from what we call, I think I still call it the quick check. It's been renamed here recently. You see people trying to run across Tenny Mountain Highway all the time to get from one side to the other. Whether it's people trying to get to the George's Restaurant from one side. I think it is appropriate to ask the question, is there anything that we should be doing on Highland Street that will support that effort ultimately? I like you, I don't know what the answer is, but our town engineer could perhaps share some light on that, or he may come back and say, like Mr. Kelly's indicated, there's just no way to forecast that at this point.
Mr. Kelly?
The other thing too is that will be part of the corridor discussion as far as that's concerned. The whole area down through there, whether it's that where the stoplight is now, or whether there'll be a roundabout or whatever, but that will be all, that's part of the conversation we're going to have in the corridor thing. It has nothing to do with this.
Mr. Wilson?
But if we end up putting a sidewalk in and it ends up costing the town money, and that's once again, the concept of impact fees. So if we don't ask it of the applicant, or at least make some provision for it, then later on we do a corridor study, then it may be on the town's, purely out of the town's pocket to provide those sidewalks. So that's why it's a good idea to talk about it now.
So we're looking, yes, Mr. Wainwright.
Didn't the applicant address that future development, if the road had to be widened, and didn't they do that last week? I mean, they were talking about the sidewalk, they were talking about a crosswalk there, and what they were...
Yes.
I guess a couple things. I mean, this is the impact fee just came up tonight, but and Sharon mentioned, just to touch on it real briefly, a sidewalk or crosswalk between the two lots. We'd certainly be agreeable to that. You know, it could be a condition of approval to provide a crosswalk. If we were to do that, we'd provide obviously a sidewalk from the building to the crosswalk to the building on the other side. That makes sense. We'd agree to that on either plans. In terms of the off-site, you know, our feeling is that if there is a future development out here, then a sidewalk may be warranted from Highland Street to come down here. So what we want to do as part of the signalization plans here is make sure we accommodate that, make sure that the signals are set back far enough so that the sidewalk can fit in there, the signals can be retrofitted with crosswalk signals, just to accommodate that in the future. What we don't feel that is warranted right now is that actual sidewalk being constructed right now, knowing that Highland Street will need to be widened in the future. That sidewalk would not be in the proper location right now. It would be a temporary sidewalk, if you will. We don't feel like the two proposed uses here are going to generate the foot traffic coming down Highland Street. I hate to say it, especially the McDonald's with the having to walk right by Burger King, but that's what's out there. Impact fees, that's a reasonable request. I mean, I don't know what that impact fee amount would be, but if the board was so inclined, Mr. Vignali could probably easily perform some type of rational nexus or the likes as to what the contribution for this development would be in the event that the town does want to extend that sidewalk, or the town ends up expanding the intersection for some other reason, and the sidewalk needs to go in there. There can be a contribution made from these two sites. That's certainly something that we would agree to as a condition of approval, whatever that amount was determined to be. So I don't think we have a problem with any of that. Our feeling is it's just that constructing the sidewalk right now would be premature in our opinion.
I would agree.
Okay. So if I understand the task correctly, you'd like me to speak to Mr. Vignali to come up with some general
Tell us what he thinks.
Yeah, because he's,
He may say, walk away from it.
okay.
So we have an item on the table, and it's been seconded, to table this until next week. Continue it.
Next meeting.
Next meeting. I'm still, the discussion for me is, can we handle the information we need to get from the town engineer by doing a conditional approval? That's still my thought, because there's no new information as far as engineering, with the exception of a site impact fee at this point. That's the only reason really to get the engineer here. That's the only topic I can think of. And I'm not sure whether we can make that a condition that there's an approved upon amount of money that the applicant and the engineer can come up with, whether that's possible or not. Mr. Renlet and then Mr. Wilson.
Okay. The town engineer has already looked at the site plan, and he came up with these 11 items that he questioned, right?
Yes.
So if we approved it with, you know, those items 1 through 11, you know, had to be satisfied as a conditional approval. I mean, I think we could do it that way. That's just...
And that still doesn't, it still doesn't address the impact of,
Right.
impact fee that,
Well, I think that's, okay.
which in the future, I mean, something's going to be done with Highland Street and a crosswalk. And again, we're talking about the last guy in paying all the expenses, when there's 2 lots right there that would benefit greatly from that walkway. So I'm wondering, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to recall that in the beginning of this discussion about having the town engineer involved, we were talking about the provision for drainage for the 25 or 50 or 100-year event.
And I would think that could be another,
It could be, I would just caution you against overloading conditions to the point where you really need to be coming back and finishing the conversation, that's all. But
so then possibly what we need the town engineer to come back with information is sidewalk from lot 1 to 2, coming up with some sort of figure to assess a site impact, and to talk about whether the 25-year storm event is the standard that is acceptable for that lot. So we have an item on the table to continue this to the next meeting, which is September, what again?
next regularly scheduled public meeting would be Thursday, September 20th.
So we have 3 items, and to get the engineer to... All right. All those in favor of continuing this meeting to September 20th, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No? No? So it's almost unanimous.
So could you warn the public at large, all the butters, just
Yes.
literally, please?
So those out there in the seats and watching on television, this meeting, this application for Lot 1 will be continued till September 20th, which is the 3rd Thursday of the month, a regularly, obviously scheduled meeting. That brings us to C, which is a site plan review, Lot 2, a subdivision for a Bank of New Hampshire, single-story, 2,340 square foot building off a private access drive at the intersection of Tenny Mountain Highway and Highland Street, PID 212-046/047. And would you like to bring us up to date on this one,
General
Sharon?
overview, sure.
Yes.
The proposed project for Lot 2 which is being created by the previous subdivision, is for the construction of a new Bank of New Hampshire office. The subject parcel is approximately 1.5 acres in size and is the most easterly of the two proposed commercial lots on Tenny Mountain Highway. The bank, which is this project, will also be accessed from the private drive that is being constructed as part of the associated subdivision. The proposed bank is a single-story building with a gross floor area of 2,340 square feet. Vehicle access around the building will be accommodated by a three-lane drive, including a drive-through teller window. On-site lighting and landscaping is included in the design plans and complies with local requirements, including dark skies compliance. On-site drainage will be constructed, which includes a subsurface retention basin comprised of underground storage chambers. A comprehensive stormwater management report has been prepared for the site improvements. This is the site that abuts most closely the jurisdictional wetlands, and although they are located on the parent parcel in this iteration, but as subdivided, will be located more closely to lot number 2. This lot is also in the airport overlay zone and does not have any contradictions or contraindications with that. And also, if you've seen on your site improvement plans, and I do have the big map, big plan set if anybody wants to look at it, the tree line is going to remain maintained. So they're not cutting into that existing tree line for this Bank of New Hampshire project.
All right. At this point, we invite the applicant to come up and give us their overview.
Okay, once again, Jeff Lewis from North Point Engineering. Also, Bob Curtis from Bank of New Hampshire is here this evening and could answer any questions you folks may have on the operation of the bank. It's going to be very similar to the McDonald's site plan that we just reviewed. Just to keep it very brief on the checklist, the site plans are very similar from a design perspective. We did submit the site plan, went through the application checklist, believe we do have a complete application, as I believe Sharon mentioned, so we think we're good to go. So if it's okay, I'll go right into the presentation. Across the way here on lot 2, which is a 1.5 acre site. This site, the property line does extend down into what is a wetland that is fed by a culvert under Tenny Mountain Highway that then drains into the oxbow pond, small oxbow pond that's on the parent track here. I just point that out as there are some wetlands on this parcel, which are not on the parcel across the road. However, we're not impacting any of those. We're not clearing, as Sharon mentioned, any of the trees that exist adjacent to those. We're bringing the fill in from the parent track and raising it up to above the floodplain elevation. And proposing a site plan for the bank, which looks like this. It's a similar design to the McDonald's site plan. It is a bank. We obviously have the landscaping that's shown on this plan, which we again believe is a comprehensive planting plan that exceeds the requirements of the town of Plymouth. Access around this site, we do have an entrance-only drive right here, right turn in from the main access drive. So as you're coming in, you'll be able to turn into the development. That doesn't have the conflicting movements that the exit out of McDonald's has. There should not be any real issues with that as people are just coming in off the drive. They'll be able to get in, circulate around the building. Over on this side, we do have the drive-through lanes, typical drive-through lanes with the 2 teller lanes and an ATM lane, and some stacking room up behind those drive-through lanes. And then a single exit, actually an ingress and egress out onto the shared drive to the north. So the only exit from this side would then be back out here and then down that way. So it's different in terms of site access or circulation than the McDonald's plan, but We do have the required number of parking spaces. Landscape lighting is a similar design. Cutoff fixtures, dark sky compliant. And the drainage design is the same type of system as we were proposing on Lot 1. In this case, we're taking the runoff on this side of the center median, and similarly the south side of the drive up there, all being collected in catch basins, storm drains, the same pre-treatment water quality unit that I talked about on the McDonald site plan, and the same type of subsurface infiltration chambers to put that water back into the ground. In this case, we have a overflow for that drainage, subsurface drainage system, which is located under the parking lot back here, and the overflow will go directly into the wetland, which is where the runoff goes now, and down on its way. So it's a very similar design. Again, that's all part of the alteration of terrain permit that we've submitted to DES. That's all part of the drainage calculations that have been reviewed by Mike Vignali, and he does have some comments on those as well. That's basically that site plan in a nutshell. I think I can probably stop there on that. It should be pretty straightforward. I was going to again read through the list from Mike Vignali. He has a letter dated August 13th relative to the Bank of New Hampshire site plan. This one only has 9 comments. A lot of them are similar to the ones we just heard on McDonald's. General comment number 1 is again regarding the pedestrian access, which I think we've covered from the last application. In this instance, our preference, as I've said before, would be to have the sidewalk along the McDonald side. So as it applies to this site plan, I think we're talking about just the crosswalk. We'd be willing to have a crosswalk come across the drive, and then a crosswalk or a sidewalk up to the building. So that's something we'll certainly add to the plan. He has comment number 2, all site sign types must be called off on the plans. That's the same comment we talked about before, just providing the notation and details for the stop signs and turning signs on the plan. Item number 3, at the east side of the site is a 2-to-1 slope. If we look at the grading plan, which I can pull up, this whole light green area in here, which is a grass area, is a slope coming up from the wetland, which is part of the fill area of the site. So it is a 2-to-1 slope all the way down here, including up here, Jason, at the end of this dead-end drive. His comment is relative to right at that end that there should be a guardrail for people who aren't coming down here, and some signage to prevent that from just going off that 2-to-1 slope. So that's a legitimate comment. We'll definitely add the guardrail and signage at the end of that dead end. Item number 4, depict the stone aprons on the drainage plans. I think we identify some stone riprap outlet aprons on the erosion control plan, but did not show them on the drainage plan, so that's just something we just missed in the design. It's just identifying the location on the plans, which we can take care of easily. Items 5 through 9 are relative to the drainage. Item 5 is the same comment regarding the test pits being performed underneath the subsurface basin, which, similar to the other site, we'll need to perform. We're prepared to perform those, and we will be required to do that as part of the DES permit. So we have no problem with that comment, and we'll address it. Item 6, drainage from the proposed access road flows onto the proposed site development drainage system. Again, talking about easements for maintenance. It's the same thing we talked about on McDonald's. We do have the long-term maintenance plan. We'll need the easements similar to the other site and to the subdivision. Items 7 and 8 are the same comments we talked about. Item 7 is just regarding the notation between the land saver units and the storm tech units, which are the 2 corresponding chambers we're using, just making sure the notation is correct on the plan. And number 8 is regarding the manufacturer's notes on the water quality unit, which is the treatment device, and providing some additional information on the plan, so we'll absolutely do that. And number 9 is a same comment also, referencing the inspection and maintenance plan and identifying some more notation on the site plan relative to that long-term maintenance plan and the responsibilities of the property owners who are affected. That's it. Those are the 9 comments. Those are like I said, very similar to the ones we already talked about. We don't have any problems with any of those. I feel like they're very clear. I would point out, just possibly to correct myself from the last time, I pulled out this is the NHDES alteration of terrain application, which the town has a copy of. This was reviewed by Mike Vignali. It does have all of the drainage calculations in here. The DES requirements exceed those that the town has in the site plan regulations for runoff control, pre versus post runoff from the site, and how you design the drainage system. We have to run the calculations for 3 different storms for DES, the 2-year, the 10-year, and the 50-year. So that's what this was, the drainage system was designed for. In terms of the peak runoff control from the site, that's a 50-year storm. DES wants to make sure that we're not increasing any rates of runoff or any volume of runoff in a 50-year storm. They also want us to look at the smaller storms because it's possible that you could increase the runoff in a smaller storm while not doing that in the larger storm. So they want you to look at all those conditions. So I just wanted to clarify that. I probably misspoke on the last application, but it is a 2, 10, and 50-year storm, and what both these sites were designed for. I'll stop there.
At this point, we want to make sure that we've got a completed application, and if there's a motion on the table, we can decide vote whether it is should be accepted. That's complete. Unless there's further questions for the applicant. Yes, Ms. Bishop.
Can you explain, I brought this up the last time, and it just I keep looking at it, but as far as the traffic, what kind of traffic study was done? And I did talk about trying to have an added lane over there and on the other side. You did explain it, but if you can go in a little depth, because when I'm thinking traffic, when I'm heading down Tenny Mountain Highway, and you've got the traffic light going green, and you got people held back here, and people wanting to go over here, and vice versa. It could be a major.
On Tenny Mountain Highway, you're talking about?
Right. As far as like how much traffic are those 2 businesses going to bring, or estimated? You know, how is that really? What's the big delay on the lights? And how is it going to be compensated? I just wanted to know how that study was determined with DOT. Yep. Why not to do that? Or if you can explain that to me.
I can explain it to you the best I can, and may have to get some more information from the traffic consultant. There was the traffic consultant that Mr. Bigley uses on this project is Stephen Pernaugh, was a traffic consultant who was involved in the Lowe's site development project. So there's been a comprehensive analysis that he had performed as part of the previous application, if you will. We've looked at some build-out or some future options for future development on the site, and worked with DOT through Steve Pernaugh as to what the thresholds would be that would require widening, additional turning lanes out there. I can't speak to give you exact numbers right now. I can certainly provide them or get that information for you. But I can tell you that what was agreed upon with DOT based on these 2 uses was that it would not necessitate what we call a designated right turn lane heading in the westbound direction, that for the amount of traffic that would be coming into the site for these 2 uses, this lane right here, a through lane combined with a right turn lane as 1 lane, would be adequate for the traffic getting in there. Obviously coming out of the site, we have 3 designated lanes, which is more than what's going to be needed for these 2 uses right now. So you have designated through lane, left turn, and right turn lane. In the eastbound direction, there is a designated left turn lane. So you will have people, this will be basically what's there in the future. What's missing from this plan really is, or will be there in the future, is that widening on this side of the road for a designated right turn lane in, and widening over on this side for a designated widening of the Highland Street intersection right here for a designated left turn through lane and right turn out. Right now, there'll just be a lane for left turn and straight through. That'll be 1 lane, and then the right turn lane will be So this is 2 lanes now, it will be 3 lanes in the future at some point. And same here, this is 2 lanes, it will be 3 lanes in the future. So that's,
I was kind of thinking when it was brought up about that roundabout, we don't know whether a roundabout would ever go down that way when we take the study, but if that other lane was out there, it would be that much more lesser construction if they did go into that roundabout. Does that make sense?
yeah,
I don't know.
the approach to a roundabout would be, yeah, it'd be a different approach tactics coming into the roundabout, so I'm not sure I can talk to that.
So at this point, if we're going to decide whether the application is complete, I would be willing to entertain a motion.
I'll move.
Okay. A second? Mr. Ramlett? Those in favor of accepting the application as complete signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. And now that brings us to a public hearing, which we will open at 8:37. And let's see, we will now allow the public to speak, those that are in favor of the application. Would like to address the applicant or the board. Yes.
Bud Crane, 84 Island Street. I was speaking in favor of development in that area in this application. Commercial development in town in that area is the right place to do it. Council will pass a comment at this time.
Sure.
Just an observation on the board. It seems like you continue hearings, asking questions that Joe so pay a professional like Mike McNally to answer and write to the board. It seems like it's counterproductive. Some of the 25-year flood issues and stuff, that's what Mike does for the town, correct? He reviews the plan and reports and poses questions to the applicant. It seems like we continue just to talk about the same thing that he's already answered, just a comment. And as a taxpayer, it doesn't seem like who would use the tax money or the applicant's money.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the application? Seeing none. Those that would like to speak in opposition to the application? Yes.
The way these sessions go, it's always whether you're for it or against it. I'm very much in favor of banks. I love banks. I love restaurants. I also favor development. I mean, I'm not against development. What I'm looking for from the planning board is reasonable development. It's orderly development. It's development that's consistent with the master plan. It's consistent with zoning ordinance, and it's consistent with the regulations that you have to apply. And there was some discussion earlier about the standards that you're asking to apply. What the subdivision regulations provide is that a subdivision shall conform to the master plan to the maximum extent possible. That's what your subdivision regulations say. Now, what your zoning ordinance says is that if any provision of this article differs or appears to conflict with any provision of the zoning ordinance or other ordinance or regulation, the provision imposing greater restriction or more stringent standard shall be controlled. And what your subdivision regulations also say is that where these regulations are in conflict with other local ordinances, the more stringent standard shall apply. Where both state and local regulations are applicable, the most stringent regulation shall take effect. So I just want to be clear about where I'm coming from. You're not asked to ignore these regulations. You're not asked to apply a different standard. The regulations tell you the standard you're supposed to apply. And, it's not about whether you like a particular application, don't like a particular application. All I'm saying is that when you are making these decisions, you're asked to apply standards. There was discussion before about conservation easements. That's a wonderful private way of conserving land. That doesn't appear to be the case with these applications. But the fact that there's not a conservation easement, the fact that private citizens have not taken care of that problem, doesn't mean that you can simply ignore the public regulations. The private solution is not a substitute for the public standard you're asked to apply. So I'm just asking you to, as you make these votes, to take account of what the regulations require, what the standards are, and to impose them faithfully, because a faithful imposition of these standards is a fair way to go, so that when other applicants come forward, they're not being treated differently. The standards are the standards that you have. I'm just asking you to apply them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak of a general nature about the application? Yes.
Yeah, just one issue in regards to the...
Please identify yourself.
Kevin French, surveyor. Sorry.
Surveyor for the applicant.
Yes. One question that I have is more of a comment than anything else regarding the impact phase. I don't know if you made that part of your corridor study thing or something like that, and give a few, or it would be nice to give some real guidelines to what that is. The reason I bring that up is that was a question that I brought up when CBS came here, and I've got nothing against CBS, so don't. But to that very issue, what if that intersection is improved? What if there is a sidewalk needed at some point in time, and should there be an impact fee for that? I worry about it because I don't want to see, whether it's this applicant or the next one, the last guy in seems to always be the guy that gets hit with this. It'd be kind of nice to have, if you did it, corridor study, and I'm certain things. Is there going to be sidewalks, and so that we could kind of appropriate it proportionately to each application as you go forward. And that's just if there was a way that if you could do that and incorporate it into the study when you're doing it, it would just be, I think it'd be beneficial for the town, and it'd certainly be beneficial for the applicants knowing what they're getting into when they come in, rather than, you're the last guy and we want to, go a sidewalk down heading on the highway. Of course, have to be on the south side of the road.
Thank you. Any other general comments? Yes. Your name and...
Dominic Marco, I live in Silver Lane. Point was brought up about potential cost to the town of this development, the sidewalk, whether we would pay that or the developer would pay it. And I've had this thought coming in tonight that when you look at development, one of the reasons people look for commercial development is, of course, they say, well, it's going to lower our property tax because we're going to get all this money coming in. And yes, we do get the money. There's no question about that. For example, when Walmart came in, we got a big chunk of money. But then, of course, they complained, and they got the amount lowered, and we had to give them back a big chunk of money. So, the amount of riches you think you're going to get can sometimes bite you after the fact. And I'm concerned about these upfront costs, and nobody has been very specific about that. As somebody who owns property in town, I own a home in town, I pay property tax, and over the years that I've lived here, development has gone up and up and up and up. My property taxes have gone up and up and up and up and up. And my property taxes now are so high that it really hurts living in Plymouth. And I think about leaving town because of that, because it's so high. If you just took your property and moved it to anywhere, any town in a circle around us, you'd cut at least in half your property tax. So my point is, I am concerned about this kind of development, whether it's these two lots we're talking about, or the owner of this property talks about future development in that lot. There have been studies done. I've got one here I was looking at before I came in. Their conclusion was a very large study. And what they concluded, when you get development like this, there's a negative impact on your property tax. You don't have a net gain, you have a net loss. So what happens is all of us who own homes in this town are going to subsidize this development and other development projects like this with our property taxes. We're going to be net losers, not gainers. We're going to lose. And I have a big concern about that. So we talked about some of the potential upfront costs, but nobody's addressing the long-term costs either. It's a fallacy to think we're going to get rich from this kind of development in this town. People think that way. They think, oh, all this money's going to come in. It doesn't work that way. If that's the case, why has development has continued over the years? Have our taxes gone up and up? And studies like this say it's because of development. That's why.
Thank you very much. To address that comment about impact fees that Mr. French brought up and you just brought up, this board spent a number of hours researching that very topic over the past year, more.
Probably 2 years ago.
Several years.
And it was probably over a period of 4 to 6 months that we threw that topic of impact fees around and around and around. And we did a
Consultant that we paid for.
We paid for a consultant. We did a ton of research. Ms. Bishop, on her own time, spent a lot of time gathering information. And the board can jump in, but we had a very hard time looking at the business climate at the time, looking at the economy, on whether impact fees were the best course for Plymouth. And I'll let other board members kind of jump in on. We decided at that time that we were not, I believe, maybe we didn't make a decision. It was kind of just kind of left there to kind of die and wither, rather than make a decision to set more fees, another hurdle for businesses to jump over in order to settle their business, in order to put their operation in Plymouth. And I think that we wanted to look, I don't want to put words in the mouth of the members, but I think we were trying to be as business friendly as we could and encourage people to come to Plymouth.
That's my recollection also. The short of it that I came away with was that impact fees are a useful tool for a town to employ when you're having a high degree of growth that is going to impact the assets that the town has to bring to bear, such as roads, the impacts it may have on schools, police and fire facilities. And it was very clear to me in listening to the discussions we had back in 2011 that we don't have a great deal of economic development occurring right now. There was not a need to try to come up with any type of formalized plan. And it was also recognized that we do have currently in place in both our subdivision and our site plan the opportunity to look at any impact fee we might want to levy that was associated with a site specific. In this particular case, this is not going to drive any particular increase in our police and fire and school and those kind of things, but it could, on the idea of some off-site in a small way, in my mind, a small way, with transportation. But I think we did a good thing. We decided just to leave it on the table that until you have a high amount of development occurring again, there's no need to have a formal plan for impact fees.
Mr. Kelly.
My thought is, in regards to the impact fee, is you're sort of penalizing the people when things are good. And when things are not so good, then whoever comes in can sort of sneak in on underneath the radar and don't have to pay the impact fees. My thought is there any possible way that they could have some type of a reserve, figure out basically how much is going to need to be done as far as lights and stuff like that is concerned, and have the various businesses set aside a certain amount of money or a certain percentage so that when and if more businesses come in, and if it should be good times at that time, at the time that they're coming in, that everybody would share in the cost, so that it wouldn't cost the businesses now anything if nothing ever happened. But if something did happen, it's not the last man out, as far as I'm concerned.
Ms. Bishop?
I think, I'm not sure who brought that up the last time, but if I'm not mistaken, if we do take the money, we can only hold it for 7, or
Right,
do
but-
something for 7 years, 10
But I
years,
don't
so that would just...
I don't
be-
believe we have the legal wherewithal to extract an escrow, if you will, or something from pre-established businesses. It's got to be site-specific.
What do you mean pre-established business?
The businesses, if I'm hearing you right, just, you thought businesses, existing businesses in the area should be putting money aside?
I'm not
Or new-
saying putting money aside, I'm saying make a reserve so that when the time comes, they then would pay for any improvements that would also affect them.
But
There has to be a legal way of doing it.
We do have a legal way of doing it, it's property taxes.
Well, that's true, but that takes care of everybody. And I
Yeah.
hate to think of what my
Well,
property taxes are.
Typically, the businesses and the property along Tenny Mountain Highway are assessed on a commercial value versus the residential values.
They're not. They have not. There's two types of appraisals. One is income approach, and the other one is strictly value of the value. This is not a commercial income approach. I've fought for that for a long time. It is not that. It's merely if somebody improved Maine's old building there that's fallen down on Tenny Mountain Highway, their taxes would be a third of what my taxes would be because it's an old building, you know. So it's not a commercial type of taxation.
We still have an open hearing that unless there's any more comments of a general nature. Okay.
I would just like to address, I just want to make sure we all realize that this is a university town, so we have a lot of pieces of property that are either tax exempt or greatly reduced taxes. So that's wherein we are different from our surrounding towns. In terms of our tax rate, the university, an exempt or reduced or abated tax from individuals' tax requests. So that unfortunately figures into our fiscal wellness and...
Well, if you considered all of the not-for-profit organizations, whether it's the working man's new development there, the hospital, and also all the conservation easements that are in Plymouth, there's a very small part of Plymouth that is actually taxed.
Let's give the applicant a chance to, did we give him a chance to rebuttal? I don't believe we have. It's gone.
I don't think we have anything else to add unless there's specific questions you'd like us to address. I think you folks have covered it.
Is there anybody else in favor of the application that would like to give a brief rebuttal? Anyone in opposition that would like to give a brief rebuttal? Seeing none, I will close the hearing at 8:54 and bring it back to the board. Yes, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we continue the hearing on this subdivision, this site plan in the same way that we did with the previous one until the meeting on September 20th. And in the meantime, have our town engineer look into these matters, the same matters that we raised with the other site.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Renlet. Any discussion before we vote?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mr. Roach.
Are we going to ask him to look into the possibility of sidewalk impact fees for future
I
development?
think
Is
that's...
that one of the questions?
You mean trying to quantify
Right,
costs?
costs, right,
Yeah.
quantify costs, right.
Yes.
And is there a chance that he can do this in writing, or does he have to be here?
Oh, he can do it in writing, but I'm hoping very much to get him here, because I think the next meeting with the continuation before deliberation on possible approvals would be the best opportunity
There's
for him
enough
to be
time to
here.
contact
Yeah.
him again. Okay,
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
2 weeks, so I think.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion on the table? Yes, Mr. Gosney.
Just a clarification, thinking that it has already been spoken to, but I did not find on either site plan that there's any signage for either of these two lots other than what is on the buildings. I did not see any lit signs anywhere else.
No, that will be dealt with under the auspices of building permit, if and when they get there, and master sign. Right,
Review, yes.
right, but then it would come back as.
I just wanted clarification. I do not see any in the application, that there's any signs anywhere other than what's on the building.
It was one of the engineer's comments.
Pardon?
It was one of the engineer's comments. He requested that all sign types must be called in the plans. So I think you guys
They'd have to, yeah.
I think his comment was relative to directional signs and the like, I believe, but, and the intent is to have a sign. We don't have it submitted as either one of these. It would be follow the auspice of a master sign, I think, because it's to be off-site to some of the projects. So we would plan to come back before the board with a separate sign package, would be the answer to that question.
That would be a condition of approval.
Because I remember when, many years ago, when McDonald's was trying to come into Plymouth, it was the issue of the height of the sign was a big issue. So, yes.
Brian Murphy, code enforcement officer. Other than going through the ZBA, they have to stick to what's in the zoning ordinance at this point in time for a freestanding sign. If they hit all the parameters of that, there's no need for a master sign plan at this point. Part of the idea of having that at the site plan review level was to be able to creep through things that are outside of the parameters of the zoning. So if they come back to speak to it, we'll give them a chance to do it. But if they walked away today with your approval, and then they came to me, they would be stuck with a 16-foot, 100-square-foot sign. So that's just a way around to accommodate certain businesses who have greater needs for larger signs.
So we've got a motion on the table to continue this discussion and to get some comments from the town engineer, again, about the sidewalk, about a site impact fee, quantified site impact fee, and give us more information about the 25-year storm event for their drainage handling system.
I think
Anything else?
two of those are combined, unless I'm, could you say that again, please? I'm
The
sorry.
sidewalk from lot 1 to lot 2.
The interior, okay.
The interior
Yeah, interior
sidewalk.
sidewalk.
And then a site impact that would possibly,
A projected cost for an exterior, full-scale sidewalk, yeah, that's what I'm hearing. Okay, so okay, 2 sidewalks, and 1 25-year storm, or the calculations, minimum, maximum, met or exceeded by the plans presented.
Mr. Chairman?
yes, Mr. Gosney.
I'll leave it to the good judgment of our town engineer, but my view was that when I floated that subject was the idea of just extending the existing sidewalk along Highland Street to that intersection, and then seeing if it's reasonable in some fashion to design the lighting that's being proposed to accommodate, say, safe crossing.
In the future.
In the future, yes,
Right.
in the future.
Okay.
Not looking for any sidewalks on Tenny Mountain Highway, just on Highland Street,
Okay, okay. Future extension of the Highland Street sidewalk.
in the future.
And also in discussing the motion on the table about the site impact fees, I know when CVS was here, there was the talk of an impact fee in the middle of the discussion, and we did not hold them to that, to any site impact fee, because I'm guessing, and I don't want to speak for the board, but there wasn't a light that was going to be proposed there. The sidewalk was already that far. There were some reasons why we didn't, and now we'll have to continue that discussion for this application. So, all those in favor of of continuing this discussion to September 20th, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No? And it passes. All right, that brings us to item 5 on the agenda, correspondence.
Yes, 1 second. Let me just sort this out. We have I've received by certified mail 2 notices of regional impact under the auspices of notices of regional impact, one from the Woodstock Planning Board, notice of hearing for telecommunications application, a telecommunications upgrade. The upgrade is a replacement of existing 12 panels with 12 new panels at a 125-foot height level of a 150 tower. So they want to put some new panel antennas lower down on their existing telecommunications tower.
Which tower is that?
Woodstock. The location is 339 Cox Farm Road, if anyone's familiar with that.
No.
I
That's
don't.
in Woodstock?
Yes, North Woodstock. And the hearing date is September 10th, and I'll certainly pass this around so you can look at it. I also received, this is really odd, but it's under the same auspices, to the abutting towns of Danbury, New Hampshire. Public hearing September 18th for a special use permit to install 3 LTE antennas at 98 feet on the existing 100-foot tower. So these are essentially notices of potential regional impact, which is fairly boilerplate for these 2 towns, to not add additional towers, but to add to the existing towers that they have.
It's in Danbury.
No, well, I guess they were covering themselves quite extensively. So,
That brings us to item number 6, unfinished and other business.
I haven't heard from anyone on Law Lecture Series. Am I assuming no one's going? Did you speak to, you spoke to Dawn, right?
I did, and she is going to, I've got to talk to her tomorrow,
Okay.
but she's got to tell me where the, what, elementary school is in McLean?
Oh, she's going to find directions for
Yeah.
you? Okay, all right, that's all I have.
Okay. Any other unfinished or other business? Brings us to item number 7, public comments. Seeing none, that brings us to item number 8.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr.
I
Wilson.
move that we adjourn.
Okay, second? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
You got it?
I don't want to